Welcome to my channel. Imagine standing at the biggest opportunity of your life, hearing a voice inside your mind whisper, "No, you can't do this," and then walking away before you even try. Now imagine hearing that same voice every single day until you can no longer tell the difference between reality and fear. This was Daniel's life. He was intelligent, hardworking, and capable, but there was one invisible enemy he could never escape. It followed him into classrooms, sat beside him during exams, appeared whenever he wanted to speak English, and became louder every time someone gave him a chance to prove himself. The voice always said the same thing: "No, you will fail. You are not ready. People will laugh at you. Stay quiet. Stay safe." Daniel believed it so often that he slowly stopped questioning it. He had dreams, but he did not chase them. He knew English, but he avoided speaking it. He studied for exams, but still entered the examination hall expecting failure. He saw opportunities, but instead of asking whether he could succeed, he immediately asked himself how badly he might fail. And the strangest part was that nobody around him understood what was happening. To his teachers, Daniel was simply a quiet student. To his classmates, he was intelligent but reserved. To his family, he was someone who had potential but needed more confidence. But inside his own mind, Daniel was fighting a battle nobody could see. Every morning, he woke up with possibilities, and every night, he went to sleep thinking about everything he had been too afraid to do. His dream was simple. He wanted to speak English confidently, build a successful career, and become someone who could stand in front of people without feeling his heart race. But whenever he imagined himself succeeding, another image immediately appeared. He saw himself making mistakes. He saw people laughing. He saw himself forgetting words, failing exams, losing opportunities, and proving everyone wrong who believed in him. The more he imagined failure, the more real it felt. One morning, Daniel received an opportunity that should have made him excited. His college announced an English-speaking competition, and the winner would receive recognition and a chance to participate in a major academic program. Daniel immediately knew he could prepare for it. He had studied English for years. He understood grammar. He could read difficult texts. He knew hundreds of words. Deep down, he knew he was capable of giving a good performance. But before he could even think about participating, the familiar voice appeared. "No, you can't do this." Daniel looked at the registration form in his hand. His heart became heavy. "What if I forget everything?" he thought. "What if my pronunciation is wrong? What if everyone laughs?" The voice became stronger. "Don't embarrass yourself. Let someone else participate. You are not ready." Daniel slowly folded the form and placed it inside his notebook. "Maybe next time," he whispered. But next time never came. A week later, the competition began. Daniel sat in the audience and watched another student walk onto the stage. The student was not perfect. He made small mistakes. His pronunciation was not flawless. At one point, he even paused because he forgot a word. But he continued. He smiled, breathed, and finished his speech. The audience applauded. Daniel watched silently. Something inside him hurt. It was not jealousy. It was regret. He suddenly realized something terrifying. The student on the stage was not necessarily more intelligent than him. He was simply willing to try. Daniel had rejected the opportunity before failure had even become possible. That night, he returned home and opened his notebook. The competition form was still there, folded between the pages. He stared at it for several minutes. Then he asked himself a question that he had avoided for years. Why do I keep running away from opportunities when I know I am capable? The answer did not come immediately. But slowly, Daniel began to see the truth. His biggest enemy was not his English. It was not his intelligence. It was not his lack of preparation. His biggest enemy was the voice inside his mind that always predicted failure before he ever took the first step. And once Daniel understood that, he realized something even more frightening. If he could not control that voice, it would control his entire future. The next morning, Daniel walked into college carrying the same fear, but something inside him had changed. He had finally noticed the enemy. Now he had to discover whether it was possible to defeat it. The next morning, Daniel walked into college carrying the same fear, but something inside him had changed. He had finally noticed the enemy. Now he had to discover whether it was possible to defeat it. During lunch, Daniel sat alone near the college garden, staring at the students around him. Some were laughing, some were discussing their assignments, and others were preparing for their next classes. Daniel watched them and wondered how many people were secretly fighting battles that nobody could see. Suddenly, his English teacher, Mr. Thomas, walked past and noticed Daniel sitting quietly. "You look lost today," he said with a gentle smile. Daniel looked up and forced a small smile. "I am fine, sir." Mr. Thomas sat beside him. "Are you sure?" Daniel hesitated. For some reason, he felt that if he told the truth, something inside him might finally change. "Sir, I know I can do many things, but whenever I get an opportunity, I become afraid. My mind tells me I will fail before I even begin." Mr. Thomas listened carefully. He did not immediately give advice. Instead, he asked a question that Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. "Daniel, do you control your thoughts, or do your thoughts control you?" Daniel became silent. The question sounded simple, but it felt strangely powerful. He had never considered it before. He had always assumed that if a thought appeared in his mind, it must be true. If his mind said, "You will fail," he believed it. If his mind said, "People will laugh," he believed it. If his mind said, "You are not ready," he believed it. But what if those thoughts were not facts? What if they were only thoughts? "Mister." Thomas looked at him and said, "Your mind produces thousands of thoughts every day. Some are useful, some are useless, some are based on reality, others are based on fear. The problem begins when you believe every thought without questioning it." Daniel looked down at his hands. "Then, how do I stop these thoughts?" he asked. Mr. Thomas smiled. "You do not have to stop them." Daniel looked confused. "Then, what should I do?" "Observe them," the teacher replied. "For 5 minutes every morning, sit quietly. Close your eyes, breathe naturally, and watch your thoughts. Do not fight them, do not argue with them, do not follow them. Simply notice them and let them pass." Daniel almost laughed. 5 minutes sounded too simple. He had spent years trying to become confident, and now his teacher was telling him that 5 quiet minutes might help him understand his own mind. Still, he decided to try. The next morning, Daniel woke up earlier than usual. His hand immediately moved toward his phone, but he stopped. For the first time, he remembered the challenge. 5 minutes, that was all. He placed the phone on the table, sat on the edge of his bed, closed his eyes, and took a slow breath. For 3 seconds, everything seemed peaceful. Then his mind exploded. "What are you doing?" one thought said. "This is pointless." Another appeared. "You have assignments to finish." Then another. "You are wasting your time." Daniel tried to focus on his breathing, but suddenly he remembered the English competition. He imagined himself standing on stage, forgetting every word while hundreds of people laughed at him. His heart began beating faster. Then the voice appeared again. "See, you cannot even meditate. How will you ever become confident?" Daniel opened his eyes. He had survived less than 2 minutes. "I knew it," he whispered. "Even meditation is impossible for me." He almost stood up and walked away, but then he remembered Mr. Thomas's words. "Do not fight the thoughts. Observe them." Daniel closed his eyes again. The negative voice returned immediately. "You are wasting your time." This time, Daniel did something different. Instead of believing the thought, he simply noticed it. "I am having the thought that I am wasting my time," he said silently. The sentence felt strange. He repeated it. "I am having the thought that I cannot do this." Suddenly, something changed. The thought was still there, but Daniel was looking at it from a distance. For the first time, he understood that there was a difference between "I cannot do this" and "I am having the thought that I cannot do this." The first sounded like a fact. The second sounded like an observation. Daniel continued breathing. Another thought came. You will fail. He observed it. That is a thought. Another appeared. People will laugh. He observed it. That is another thought. Slowly, Daniel discovered something that would change his life. His mind was not always telling him the truth. It was simply producing thoughts based on fear, memories, insecurity, and past experiences. The voice inside him had been speaking for years, but Daniel had never questioned its authority. Now, for the first time, he was listening without obeying. The next morning, he repeated the practice. 5 minutes. Then again, the next day. Some mornings were peaceful, other mornings were difficult. Sometimes his mind became so noisy that he wanted to quit. But whenever the voice said, "This is useless," Daniel answered silently, "Maybe, but I will finish 5 minutes." When the voice said, "You will never change," he answered, "Maybe I will. I do not know yet." This new attitude slowly created a space between Daniel and his thoughts. He still felt fear, but fear no longer had complete control. A few days later, the first real test arrived. During an English class, Mr. Thomas asked a simple question. "Daniel, can you answer this?" Daniel immediately felt his stomach tighten. The old voice appeared. "Stay quiet. Someone else will answer. If you speak, you will make a mistake." Daniel lowered his eyes. His hand almost stayed on the desk. Then he remembered his 5 minutes. He noticed the fear. He noticed the thought. He did not fight it. He did not believe it. He simply watched it. And then, slowly, something unexpected happened. Daniel raised his hand. The classroom became quiet. Mr. Thomas smiled and asked him to answer. Daniel stood up. His voice shook. His first sentence was correct, but halfway through his answer, he made a grammar mistake. A few students laughed. The old voice immediately returned, louder than ever. "I told you. You should have stayed quiet." For one painful second, Daniel felt the familiar urge to sit down and disappear. But then he took a breath. He looked at the mistake differently. "I made a mistake," he thought. That is all. It was not proof that he was stupid. It was not proof that he could never speak English. It was simply a mistake. Daniel finished his answer and sat down. His heart was still beating quickly, but something inside him felt different. He had not defeated fear. He had done something more important. He had acted while fear was still present. That evening, Daniel returned home and sat for his 5 minutes. The negative voice appeared again, but this time it sounded slightly weaker. "You embarrassed yourself today." Daniel listened. Then he smiled. Maybe, he thought, but I spoke. The voice became silent for a moment. Daniel realized that courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was the decision to move forward even when fear was speaking loudly. From that day forward, Daniel stopped trying to become fearless. Instead, he began practicing something far more powerful. He learned to hear the voice without obeying it. And he had no idea that soon he would face an opportunity so frightening that even his new confidence would be pushed to its absolute limit. From that day forward, Daniel stopped trying to become fearless. Instead, he began practicing something far more powerful. He learned to hear the voice without obeying it. And he had no idea that soon he would face an opportunity so frightening that even his new confidence would be pushed to its absolute limit. Over the next few weeks, Daniel continued his 5-minute meditation every morning. Nothing dramatic happened at first. There were no magical moments, no sudden disappearance of fear, and no transformation that everyone around him could immediately notice. But slowly, quietly, something inside Daniel was changing. His thoughts were still there, but they no longer felt like commands. When his mind said, "You cannot do this," Daniel began asking, "Is that a fact, or is that only a thought?" When his mind said, "People will judge you," he answered, "Maybe they will, maybe they will not, but I cannot control their opinions." When his mind said, "You are not ready," he replied, "I may not be perfect, but I can still begin." This new habit began changing the way Daniel lived. He started practicing English every evening, not because he suddenly became confident, but because he had stopped waiting for confidence to arrive first. He understood that confidence was not something he needed before taking action. Confidence was something he could build by taking action. So he began with small steps. He read English paragraphs aloud. He recorded his voice and listened to it. He spoke to himself in English while walking around his room. Sometimes his pronunciation sounded strange to him, and sometimes he made embarrassing mistakes. But whenever the negative voice appeared, he simply noticed it. I hear you, he would think, but I do not have to obey you. Then one afternoon, something happened that Daniel had been secretly hoping for and secretly fearing at the same time. Mr. Thomas entered the classroom carrying a list of names. He looked unusually serious. Our college is organizing a major English presentation event, he announced. Students from different departments will attend. There will be teachers, guests, and hundreds of students in the audience. Daniel's stomach immediately tightened. He knew what was coming before his name was even mentioned. Mr. Thomas continued, we need one student to represent our class. Daniel stared at his notebook. The old voice returned instantly. No, do not look up. Do not volunteer. This is too big for you. Then Mr. Thomas said the words Daniel had been secretly hoping he would never hear. Daniel, I want you to represent the class. For a moment, Daniel could not breathe properly. The room seemed to become silent. He looked around, hoping the teacher might be talking to someone else. But Mr. Thomas was looking directly at him. Daniel felt dozens of eyes turning toward him. His mind immediately began creating terrifying images. He saw himself standing on a huge stage. He imagined hundreds of people staring at him. He imagined forgetting his introduction, losing his words, making grammar mistakes, and standing in complete silence while everyone watched. The negative voice became louder than it had ever been. Say no. Tell him you are sick. Tell him you have another assignment. You are not ready. This is exactly what you should avoid. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. He could reject the opportunity. Nobody would blame him. He could say that another student would be better. He could return to his safe life, where he could continue practicing English privately without risking embarrassment. But then Daniel remembered the student he had watched on stage weeks earlier. He remembered how that student had made mistakes and continued anyway. He remembered the pain he had felt while sitting in the audience, realizing that fear had made the decision for him. This time, he wanted to make the decision himself. Daniel took a slow breath. The voice said, no. Daniel looked at Mr. Thomas. Yes, he said. The classroom became quiet. Even Daniel seemed surprised by his own answer. Yes, sir, I will do it. The voice inside his head immediately attacked him. What have you done? You are going to regret this. Daniel ignored it. He had said yes. The decision was made. That evening, however, the excitement disappeared. Daniel sat at his desk with his presentation notes in front of him. The words looked simple, but his mind was already preparing for disaster. You will forget everything. Your English is not good enough. The audience will laugh. You will embarrass your teacher. Everyone will remember your failure. Daniel tried to study, but every few minutes his thoughts became darker. He stood up, walked around his room, sat down again, and finally reached for his phone. He wanted to escape into social media. He wanted to stop thinking. But then he remembered what meditation had taught him. He put the phone down. He closed his eyes. 5 minutes. That was all he needed. He began breathing slowly. The thoughts came immediately. You are making a terrible mistake. He observed the thought. That is fear. Another thought came. You are going to fail. He observed it. That is another prediction. Another thought appeared. Everyone will laugh at you. Daniel took a breath. That is an imaginary future. For the first time, Daniel saw something clearly. He was not actually afraid of the presentation. He was afraid of a story his mind had created about the presentation. Nothing had happened yet. Nobody had laughed. He had not forgotten his words. He had not failed. The entire disaster existed only inside his imagination. Daniel opened his eyes. The room was exactly the same. His presentation notes were still on the table. The future had not happened. Suddenly, he understood the power of the present moment. Fear lived in the future. Regret lived in the past, but his real life was happening right now. He could prepare right now. He could practice right now. He could breathe right now. He could not control the future, but he could control what he did in the present. So Daniel practiced. He practiced once, then again, then again. He made mistakes. He forgot sentences. He started over, but each time he became slightly better. The day of the presentation arrived faster than he expected. Daniel woke up before his alarm. His mind was already awake, creating questions. What if today is the day everyone discovers you are not good enough? Daniel sat up in bed. The voice was loud, but this time he recognized it immediately. "You are afraid," he said silently. "That is okay." He did his 5-minute meditation. Then he stood in front of the mirror and practiced his opening sentence. His hands were still slightly shaking. His heart was still beating faster than normal. But he did not interpret those feelings as proof that he should quit. He understood something important. Fear could be present without being in control. When Daniel arrived at college, the hall was already crowded. Hundreds of students filled the seats. Teachers stood near the stage. Guests were arriving. Daniel looked at the enormous audience and felt the old voice return with incredible force. "Turn around. Leave now. Nobody will know." Daniel stood near the entrance. For 1 second, he seriously considered walking away. Then he remembered all those mornings, 5 minutes of breathing, 5 minutes of observing, 5 minutes of learning that a thought was not a command. Daniel closed his eyes for one final breath. The voice whispered, "You are not ready." Daniel opened his eyes. "Maybe I am not," he thought, "but I am still going." Then his name was announced. Daniel walked toward the stage, carrying the fear he had spent years trying to escape. But this time, he was not running from it. He was carrying it with him. And as he reached for the microphone, Daniel realized that the most important moment of his life was no longer about whether he would succeed or fail. It was about whether, for the first time, he would choose his own direction, instead of letting the voice inside his mind choose it for him. Daniel walked toward the stage, carrying the fear he had spent years trying to escape. But this time, he was not running from it. He was carrying it with him. As he reached for the microphone, Daniel realized that the most important moment of his life was no longer about whether he would succeed or fail. It was about whether, for the first time, he would choose his own direction instead of letting the voice inside his mind choose it for him. The light seemed brighter than he had imagined. The audience looked larger. His hands were shaking, and his heart was beating so fast that he could almost hear it. For one brief moment, the old voice became louder than everything else. "You are going to forget everything. You will embarrass yourself. Turn around. Walk away." Daniel stood silently. He could feel the fear moving through his body. His mouth became dry. His mind searched desperately for an excuse to escape. But then Daniel remembered the first lesson he had learned during those 5 quiet minutes each morning. A thought was not a command. Fear was not a prophecy. A prediction was not a fact. He took one slow breath, then another. He looked at the audience and realized that nobody there could see the battle happening inside him. They were simply waiting for him to speak. Daniel tightened his grip on the microphone. "Good morning, everyone." His voice sounded slightly nervous, but the words came out. He continued. The first sentence was finished. Then the second. He reached the third sentence and suddenly forgot one word. The old voice immediately screamed, "This is it! You failed!" Daniel paused. A few seconds passed. In the past, this moment would have destroyed him. He would have panicked, apologized, and perhaps walked away. But now he remembered to breathe. He looked at his notes, found the word, and continued. Something unexpected happened. The audience did not laugh. Nobody shouted that he was a failure. Nobody stood up and told him to leave. Most people were simply listening. Daniel continued speaking. His pronunciation was not perfect. His grammar was not flawless. His hands still shook occasionally. But his voice became stronger with every sentence. He reached the middle of the presentation and suddenly realized something that felt almost unbelievable. He was doing it. The thing he had feared for years was happening right now, and he was surviving it. More than that, he was actually enjoying parts of it. He looked across the audience and noticed the students smiling encouragingly. He saw Mr. Thomas sitting near the front, watching him proudly. Daniel felt something rise inside him that was stronger than fear. It was not perfect confidence, it was something deeper. It was trust. For the first time, Daniel was beginning to trust himself. He finished the presentation with a final sentence and lowered the microphone. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the audience applauded. Daniel stood still, almost unable to understand what had just happened. The applause grew louder. Mr. Thomas stood and clapped. Daniel smiled. He had not delivered a perfect presentation. He had made mistakes. His voice had shaken. He had forgotten a word. Yet, he had finished. And that was the victory. After the event, several students approached Daniel. One of them told him, "Your presentation was really inspiring." Another student asked him how he had become so confident. Daniel almost laughed. If they had known what was happening inside his mind just 1 hour earlier, they might have been surprised. He wanted to tell them that he was not confident when he walked onto the stage. He was terrified. The difference was that he had finally learned something important. Confidence was not the absence of fear. Confidence was the willingness to act while fear was still present. That evening, Daniel returned home and sat quietly in his room. He did not immediately celebrate. Instead, he thought about the journey that had brought him there. He remembered the English competition he had rejected. He remembered watching another student succeed while he sat in the audience. He remembered the painful question he had asked himself. He remembered the first meditation session when his mind had been so noisy that he almost gave up. He remembered the negative voice telling him that he could not even meditate properly. He remembered the first time he had questioned that voice. Is this really true? Or is this just a thought? That simple question had changed everything. Daniel understood now that meditation had never been about destroying the negative voice. The voice had not disappeared. Even after the presentation, it still existed. It still appeared before difficult decisions. It still whispered warnings whenever Daniel stepped outside his comfort zone. But something had changed. Daniel no longer treated the voice like an unquestionable authority. He could hear it without obeying it. He could feel fear without allowing fear to make his decisions. He could experience doubt without turning doubt into a permanent belief about himself. A few days after the presentation, Daniel received an unexpected message from Mr. Thomas. The college had selected him for a major academic program that included public speaking, English communication, and leadership training. It was the kind of opportunity Daniel had dreamed about for years. But now, something strange happened. The old voice appeared again. "No, you cannot do this. This program is too difficult. You will fail. You are not ready." Daniel stared at the message on his phone. For a moment, the old Daniel returned. His mind began creating imaginary disasters. He imagined himself surrounded by students who were better than him. He imagined making mistakes in front of professionals. He imagined failing and proving the voice right. But then Daniel smiled. He had heard this voice before, many times. He knew its language. He knew its patterns. He knew that it always appeared when something important was at stake. Daniel took a slow breath. He did not argue with the voice. He did not try to force it to disappear. He simply said, "I hear you." Then he waited. The voice continued, "You will fail." Daniel nodded. "Maybe I will." The voice seemed to become quieter. Daniel continued, "Maybe I will make mistakes. Maybe I will struggle. Maybe I will discover that I still have a lot to learn. But you do not get to decide for me." He accepted the opportunity. That decision became one of the most important decisions of his life. The program was difficult. Daniel struggled. He made mistakes. There were days when he wanted to quit. There were moments when the negative voice returned with all its old strength. But now Daniel had a new response. He practiced, he breathed, he observed, he acted, he learned, he repeated. Slowly, the student who once avoided opportunities began becoming someone who searched for them. Years passed. Daniel continued his meditation practice. Sometimes he meditated for 5 minutes. sometimes longer. But he never forgot the lesson that had started everything. He also became more confident in English. He spoke with people from different countries. He gave presentations. He made mistakes and laughed at them. He learned that fluency was not about speaking perfectly. It was about communicating without allowing fear to silence you. His career began to grow. New opportunities appeared. Some he accepted. Some he rejected because they genuinely did not fit his goals. The difference was that his decisions were no longer controlled by fear. He had learned to distinguish between a wise no and a fearful no. One came from understanding, the other came from insecurity. One protected his values, the other protected his comfort zone. Daniel finally understood that the negative voice inside his mind had never truly wanted to destroy him. In some strange way, it had been trying to protect him from embarrassment, rejection, uncertainty, and pain. But protection had become limitation. The voice had convinced him that safety was more important than growth. Meditation had taught Daniel something different. He could appreciate the voice without obeying it. He could listen to fear without surrendering his future to it. He could respect uncertainty while still moving forward. Many years later, Daniel returned to the same college where everything had begun. He stood in front of a group of students who reminded him of his younger self. Some were confident, some were nervous. Some had dreams they were afraid to pursue. Daniel looked at them and remembered the student he had once been. Then he shared his story. He told them about the voice that always said no. He told them about the opportunities he had rejected, the mistakes he had made, and the 5 minutes that slowly changed his relationship with his own mind. At the end of his speech, a student raised a hand and asked, "Daniel, how did you finally become confident?" Daniel smiled. He thought about the question for a moment before answering. "I did not become confident because the voice inside my mind disappeared," he said. "It is still there sometimes. I simply stopped asking it for permission to live my life." The room became quiet. Daniel continued. "For years, I thought I needed to silence every negative thought before I could take action. But I discovered something more powerful. You do not have to defeat every thought. You do not have to believe every thought either. You can notice a thought, question it, and then choose your action. Your mind may say no, fear may say no, doubt may say no, but your future should not be decided by the loudest thought inside your head." Daniel looked around the room. If you are afraid to speak English, speak anyway. If you are afraid to apply for an opportunity, prepare yourself and try. If you are afraid of making mistakes, remember that mistakes are not proof that you are incapable. They are evidence that you are learning. And if your mind tells you that you cannot change, ask one simple question. Is this a fact, or is this only a thought? The students listened carefully. Daniel knew that one speech could not remove their fears, but perhaps it could give them a new way to see those fears. Perhaps one person would go home and sit quietly for 5 minutes. Perhaps someone would finally raise a hand in class. Perhaps someone would apply for the opportunity they had been avoiding. And perhaps someone would discover what Daniel had discovered years earlier. The greatest battle of your life may not be against the world around you. It may be against the voice inside your own mind. But that voice does not have to control you. You can hear it without obeying it. You can feel fear without surrendering to it. You can experience doubt without becoming doubt. You can make mistakes without becoming a failure. You can stand at the edge of the unknown and take one small step forward. Daniel's life did not change because meditation magically removed every problem. His life changed because 5 quiet minutes taught him to create space between his thoughts and his choices. In that space, he discovered freedom. In that freedom, he discovered courage. In that courage, he discovered opportunities. And through those opportunities, he discovered the person he had been capable of becoming all along. So if your mind is telling you no today, pause, breathe, listen carefully, then ask yourself one question. Is this my truth, or is this only my fear speaking? You may not feel ready. You may still be nervous. You may still hear the voice saying, "You cannot do this." But perhaps you do not need to silence that voice. Perhaps you only need to take the next step anyway. Because sometimes the greatest transformation in your life begins when you stop asking your mind for permission to become the person you were always meant to be.